Hey everybody, welcome back to the channel. Today, instead of watching pros, we are going to look at more realistic matches. I've heard your feedback, and we're going to look at what average players face in Silver. We're going to see how dive really works in lower tier, concepts on how to counter, how bigger moments really matter, and overall, let's just jump in. Now that we got that intro out of the way, let's ease into today's video. I just want to remind everyone that this video is going to be very, very long before anybody comments, but I promise I'm going to do my best to timestamp everything down in the description so we can cover high level all of these concepts. The goal here, as a reminder, is to cover Silver lobbies and why people struggle in lower tier and have a more realistic experience to help you improve your gameplay to get you more into Plat, Diamond, and above. Now, my friend has been very gracious to let us spectate his lobbies. You'll notice that he hasn't played very much, going from February 3rd all the way to February 25th. He just had a wedding, congratulations to him, and he doesn't really play, but he is very talented when it comes to FPS games. Now, we're going to break down what it looks like in these lobbies, and we have two on the same map. We got really lucky, so we can really see from the perspective of two different lobbies how this goes. We're going to cover one gameplay, and then we're going to cover the next, and break that down between concepts. We're not going to cover the full round, but I'm going to find those moments where it feels like the gameplay really shifts, and something could have really happened and changed, and look at it from a high-level perspective. So let's jump into the very first round. So we're going to look at the first one where he lost. He did a lot of damage. The second one, he didn't do as hot, but he won. So let's go to really understand what happened here. This first round, we're going to break down the concept of dive and why it works in lower tier, but probably not in upper tier. You probably saw off the rep, there's a lot of silver, there is gold, there is a bronze player. Now, the first tip is to make sure what we're going to see here is a healthy balance of everyone selecting at least two tanks. You're going to notice the team up top, right off the rip, is choosing a lot of dive, pretty much. And of course, the attacking team isn't really going for dive, but they also have a venom as well. They have pretty much like a Star-Lord, can act as a flank. Now, the biggest tip that I provide to everybody, especially if you're new and you're watching this because you're trying to rank up, trying to get out of silver, is that sometimes you're going to realize that players don't necessarily pick their correct roles. We're lucky in both lobbies that we're going to spectate, so I'm giving this tip early on, probably mostly to share with your friends, is that sometimes you get in lobbies where you only have one healer, you only have one tank, there are 5 DPS, it doesn't make a whole lot of sense. The first tip I can provide is that you're going to need to switch because some people just don't know any better. Or you can give them a hard lesson and stay on your role, but unfortunately, some people just don't know any better, and that truly is a fact. There are a lot of people that don't know what roles to fill, and they will brute force it, and they're going to have to learn the hard lesson. So that's my first tip. Be flexible if you want to rank up. Remember, this is bronze and silver. People do a lot of really unorthodox and really bluntly not smart things. So let's get into the first tip, and we're going to look at it from the perspective of the thing, which is also pretty interesting here. What we're going to do is we're going to take a skyward view, and we're going to look, because you'll notice right off the rip that the thing is pretty much on enemy, behind enemy lines, which is okay. Maybe perhaps they're in a call with the Iron Fist and perhaps the Venom to go for a flank. But you're going to notice that across the board, the thing is making an aggressive play. Now, what's interesting is we're going to talk about this skyward view. So let's go and switch POVs real quick. If you step away from this video, this is probably going to be one of the most important concepts to remember. So we know our Iron Fist and Venom are pretty much dive, but we also have our thing that is located at this angle. This could be a setup to pretty much barrel right through and pretty much, you know, blast people up into the air and get them immobile to get some early knocks. The downside, remember, this is the most important concept that I always try to cover, is why dive doesn't work at the high level, is that if you lose somebody on defense, that the run back is extremely long. And having to pretty much, let's say, for example, we lose, because you're going to see us lose the Iron Fist and the thing pretty early on, that if you are missing even a portion of your team, this attacking team pretty much at that point can say, oh, we can shove because we have the numbers advantage. That's pretty much what we got to look for. The biggest mistake you see early on is that even though they'll have the advantage, is that most teams don't push. And because they're not pushing, they're pretty much letting the enemy team work all their way back, and they lose that opportunity. So that's why dive tends to work pretty early on, but you'll notice at higher elos, they do not let you have that opportunity because they do realize the mistake that has been made. You're going to realize that this mistake is being made by the thing, but also Iron Fist, why a lot of the pretty much teammates are pretty much staying on the point, and they're truly lacking focus on what the game plan is. You have two dive that are overextending, and you're going to see that mistake pretty much being played out. But because that aggression is there and they tend to lose a teammate, let's say for example, what you're going to see here play out is that they're going to lose their Venom, who's also trying to disrupt the line in the back as well. So team synergy is extremely important. It doesn't mean that these plays can't work. It just means that they have to work together. Another helpful tip is that you'll notice at higher elos is that you'll see that they'll ban Namor. If you notice that Namor are banned at a higher tier, it probably means that they're going to push higher dive. If you realize that they're going high dive, that you want to switch to Namor to go for the turrets to pretty much stop as much of that damage as humanly possible. You may be asking the question, well, if Venom is diving and they're getting dived and they're getting eliminated, what can the Venom do? Well, focus the backline, clear it up, and then go back and disrupt. So team oriented, make sure you know where the focus is and what you have to eliminate beforehand. Yes, sometimes going in the backline can be helpful, but let's go and see how this plays out. And I think you're going to understand, but I think that pretense is very important because setup at the very beginning of the round is so important. Now remember, what the thing is trying to do is pretty much disrupt by knocking them forward. The thing really benefits, especially what you're seeing here, really benefits probably going from the other way and pushing forward, so then they have a dive backwards, because otherwise, you know, the thing just pretty much gets blasted and has no way out. That's the downside here. But this is not a bad setup if everyone is on board. If the healers, let's say, were over here instead, this one or this one, to pretty much catch the thing or make sure he has an out, but that has to be communicated with your team. Otherwise, a fast elimination like this is pretty much going to cost you your team. Luckily, they do have a BRB, but I don't think you necessarily want to use the BRB for such a quick, easy attempt there. Now, remember, they are putting a lot of focus here, but it is definitely split focus. So the gameplay, even though you're playing dive, is to make sure your team is aware of what the plan is. Communication, even if you're not communicating, making sure that you are aware of what you see. If I say, okay, the thing is located over there, maybe I should set myself over here or be around him, and then try to make a play based on that. That's general game sense that can really help your team, because I understand you may not want to be on the mic, you may be too nervous, you maybe don't want to get yelled at. Well, watching this video and having the game sense to say, what is my team intended to do? Because as we mentioned, look, Iron Fist got eliminated. That means that they're down now 1 whole DPS, and the attacking team should be very much aware of making that push. Let's see what happens. Now, again, what we're seeing here in the backline is that the Venom is trying to go for some plays as they eliminate them there. The Venom is definitely in the backline trying to disrupt, but they pretty much go for a trade for trade, and the Iron Fist is pretty much making their way back. Meaning that they really had to move on this and really push forward as fast as humanly possible, because that BRB, and that's the power of Rocket as well. Rocket may not have really strong utility when it comes to ultimate, but that revive, especially early on, if you're going to play aggressive, is a great combination. You're going to realize that combinations and what you're pairing with is so important as well, especially in lower elos. Some people at lower elos have no idea what comp they're running, and there may be no synergy whatsoever, which is why it's important to make a switch. Right now, they have some pretty good synergy, whether it's intended or not, by having the dive get eliminated. I promise you, if this Rocket wasn't here, they probably would have gotten rolled a lot sooner, but that BRB definitely did help them. Let's take a look at perspective from Magneto, from the attacking team, to understand why they didn't push. And you're going to see, because yes, we lost the Venom and what that means. Let's take a look here. They're trying to make the push forward. We do see the Venom is eliminated. We do see also on the defense that the Hela is eliminated. But you're going to notice that the reason why they're able to get away with so much is that there's a lack of focus fire. The Star-Lord, I know you can't really see. Let's go to take an aerial view here, and let's back up just a little bit. See how this plays out. Let's kind of take a look right here. Focus fire is so important, they're pretty much stalling. So right now what happens is the Iron Fist made their way back, is overextending. The Iron Fist, now the Magneto and the Bucky can focus the Iron Fist, get them eliminated. But because they're doing so much damage forwards, they're trying to get the eliminations, but the Invisible Woman you saw a second ago did get healed up, so that is very much unfortunate, even though she was low. And the Iron Fist is able to go back in and is going to go for a health pack, which pretty much negates that damage and puts a lot of pressure on the back line, causing them to have their push disrupted. And that does suck, unfortunately. Let's take a look how this plays out, so you can see it. Ready? So you see that over there happening, and now the team is split. So what was once an advantage is now pretty much a disadvantage. And they're coming in disrupting, And while they are playing together, the focus fire is so important. You can do a lot of damage, but if the team's focus just isn't there, then you're going to see a whole lot of mistakes. And this is where dive can benefit at a lower tier, because dive is really intended to, quote unquote, go for the assassination and go for those picks like we're seeing. Like we saw the Bucky get eliminated at this point, and that's pretty much where their damage was coming from, because the Star-Lord, unfortunately, let's take a look at the overall damage and see what we're looking at so far here. Right, let's see. Bucky looks to be doing a lot of the damage. Star-Lord, if we look at the POV, is missing a lot of the shots, which is unfortunate. But if that focus fire, at least where the Bucky turned around, and this is where you have to be very honest with yourself. Like, if somebody on your team is struggling, it's important to say, okay, I noticed my teammate is struggling. Where can I focus to get them focused forward? So let's take a look at that Star-Lord POV real quick. And it can be frustrating, because yes, you want your teammates all to play better, but the reality is that they just don't, unfortunately. And that's where you have to pick up some of the slack, and not everyone's going to play perfect. Maybe they're just whiffing because they're having a bad day. Some people just do have bad days. But even here, we see it happening really close. There's a lot of whiffing, and it just happens. This is what happens in bronze and silver, and so why focus fire can be also very, very important, despite a lot of damage going out. And this is where I say, okay, who are you trying to focus? Because right now, Star-Lord is focusing forward, but perhaps just going for more of the squishies, especially as Star-Lord, because Star-Lord has the ability to fly up in the air, just as much as we're seeing Iron Fist. That's why dive works so early on and lower tiers, because at least you know when you're on something, then hopefully you should be doing work to get something eliminated, especially even with the Venom or vice versa. So if you notice that it's not working, you're whiffing your shots, that's another tip, is to switch immediately. Don't just focus all your damage on the tanks. Only if, let's say, for example, the whole attacking team was focused on the tank and they were low and they made the call out, or you saw there was a lot of damage because the healers are neglecting them or the healers are struggling. That is another thing that can happen. So that's another valuable tip when it comes to dive here. I know this whole first section really has to go with dive and the setup of the round, but this setup really sets a stage across the board for the team either succeeding or losing. And you're going to notice, like we had mentioned earlier, when the Venom ran in, they got eliminated, but now the attacking team is definitely going to struggle and unable to find that opening now. And that can be very frustrating for a lot of people, because then they don't know what went wrong here. Focus fire. The dive was becoming too much of a problem, even though they were getting eliminated, a lack of pushing. So if they were going to push, they got split. They decided not to push left or push right, and it caused them to get pushed back at this moment. They lost their window of opportunity. Those windows only last for so long, and those windows are so important for you to secure wins, because otherwise, guess what happened here now? When we look at this POV, what has happened here is we're back at reset, and now we're 2 minutes down on the clock. 2 minutes down, and that pretty much means that your aggression, your pushes are going to be pretty much gone for now. We're going to let everything play out, because the setup and the confidence of this team has been pretty much shot, and everything happens in the first bit of the encounters. That's probably one of the most important moments to switch, to see what's working and say, is it not working? We need to hard switch. We need to try a different angle. Maybe Star-Lord needs to make a change. Perhaps maybe if we try a different tank, and then maybe Strange and Magneto go in, maybe we don't dive, maybe we can focus fire by huddling together. Different strategy. Doesn't mean that one way is always going to work. Sometimes the suggestions that I make or others make could be so unorthodox, and we're looking at lower tier. They can work as long as you play as a team. Let's take a look. I want to look at the Magneto, because the Magneto really is the one keeping pace. And then if we look at these two POVs, what they look like. Let's take a look at the Venom. So again, Venom goes in. The Venom is really trying to find an opening here. This is another great opening, but unfortunately they get countered by the healer ults. So healer ults are there to really buy themselves some time. And the Venom, I think, is doing fantastic work here by disrupting the backline. They pretty much have done their job of pushing forward and securing this point. So that's why I wanted to focus on the Venom. The Venom did a fantastic job here. Just like, okay, we secured the point. Let's push forward. They pushed in the back line, as long as the team is reciprocating that push. So the Venom earlier could have slowed down just a little bit and then isolated so they weren't split, because the Venom not being there earlier was definitely monumental. And it's not the fault of the Venom. At the same time, you could say, well, they need to push forward, but that game sense and awareness is so important to know. Because even though your teammates may struggle or may not be in sync, it's important that you look around and you ask yourself the question, am I in sync with how good or bad my teammates are? If you're playing Apex Legends, let's say you get a crack and get a knock and they don't move, well, you've lost your opportunity. That's a Battle Royale example. If you're coming over from Apex, you know that I played a lot of Apex Legends, so I'm making that reference here. Now, unfortunately, the Venom is doing a lot of work, but let's go and backtrack and ask the question. The Venom is pushing a lot here, but why is it not working? Let's take a look at what the Magneto is doing and that pacing that we're talking about and where the focus fire is, right? As we know, Bucky's been pretty much close by, and it's going to feel like a lot of the tanks are getting eliminated and they're losing a lot of that forward momentum. They're focused on the right, but there's also somebody isolated on the left. Now, let's go ahead and pause here. Let's take a look at what utility we do have. We don't have any healer ultimates at the moment. The Invisible Woman used it for the push earlier, so they don't really have much to counter us besides doing as much damage as humanly possible. Now, what's unfortunate is the Bucky is blasting that Hela, but unfortunately, the Star-Lord is not. So let's take a look at the Star-Lord POV. And it's why it's important when you see these ultimates happen that you are switching and noticing, like, okay, I need to make a change on that play. So let's take a look at what Star-Lord is doing to counter this. Ready? And so they're both all focusing it. There's a lot of damage going out. Let's take a look at the Bucky POV to get that Hela out. Everyone is, that's pretty good. Pretty good timing. That is good synergy there. So let's ask the question, why did this fail? So they had an ultimate. The grapple doesn't work on the thing, unfortunately. So that's not going to work. The Bucky ultimate definitely could have been better placed here. Maybe going for the back line instead of the tanks because they're still full HP. The Bucky is overextended here. The Star-Lord definitely also went down. So being aware of the Star-Lord struggling here as well is kind of important. It looks like the Star-Lord, again, shooting up close, pretty much because the tank's not there. The tank is trying to cover. But as a DPS, you do need to be aware. The Star-Lord could have flew up in the air, taken a different angle, but is standing pretty much on the ground here. And that's pretty much costing them. Let's take a look at that. Invisible Woman's low in the back, and so they kind of got split here. The ultimate is going to be tough to disrupt, but the ult could have been held here. They lose Bucky. They're losing some of the heals. They needed to pretty much back up from that pressure and reset. I think resetting is really important to highlight, especially to kind of get your grounds. I know you want to maintain pressure, especially as a DPS, but it's important to say, where are our tanks? What are we looking at? Can I back up? Can I reposition? And losing ground to regroup is more important than just bursting forward and then losing yourself and then saying, where are my heals? Well, the heals are going to be overwhelmed, and especially if you're in silver and bronze, I promise you, they're going to struggle. They're going to struggle to keep you up. So just backing up and giving them some of that breathing room, especially after a major ultimate like Hela's, as an example, and you don't have a healer ult, give them a little bit of space before you put that pressure or you disrupt their backline to reset. Losing ground to recoup, especially, you don't want to stagger, is really important. Because now the defending team is recouped. They're all 5 of them, but now what we see is that staggering happening, right? Which is good that they're recouping, they're waiting for each other. So that's a fantastic thing that this team is doing. They had a really rough start by not pushing, and they lost a lot of time on the clock. I don't think this team is necessarily playing it bad, but also I like how the Strange at least is switching to switch it up a little bit. I think Magneto probably would have been the better play because they are DPSing things pretty hard here. And at least they're recouping and trying to play together and making a push forward. And because they're very high, dive heavy, you notice the Star-Lord. The Star-Lord can do a few things here as well. Either play with the team or play at a different angle, and that's what they're trying to do. They're trying to play at an angle over here, but then they're getting isolated out, whether they can play height, focus on this, and disrupt the backline, because Star-Lord can be pretty strong with that. Only if you land your shots. But of course, the biggest counter here is also Hela. Hela is really strong against knocking out like Human Torch, Star-Lord. So if you realize that it's not working and you're not getting that damage in, let's take a look at the damage at this point, then you have to be honest with yourself and say, should I switch here? Should I not? Am I struggling too hard? Because realistically, what we're seeing is that the Luna is doing more damage than the Star-Lord. So having that switch can be pretty powerful, and being aware of that. Because otherwise, if you notice you're getting diff, try a different position, try a different angle. They are positioning out. And the same thing with the Bucky whenever they're overextending. The tanks are doing a pretty solid job trying to keep the momentum forward. At the same time, the Venom is overextending a few times, and their tank is kind of stuck in the middle with the healers trying to figure out, well, who do we focus on? What do we do? So there's, when we're looking at this, I would say it's a lot of blame across the board. And to realize that team centers, you see where the Venom is trying to go for a backline but not disrupting it. This is where I'm saying it would be very helpful in this moment to have the Star-Lord do a little damage, and when the Venom goes back to disrupt that backline, but also realize that they're going dive heavy, and if you're going to counter that dive. There's a lot of questions that come up here, and I'm not saying any one of them is right or wrong. It's just being aware to say, how are you going to counter it, and what are you going to do? Either you're going to change your positioning and play style, or you have to change a character. One of the two has to happen. You can't just keep brute forcing it, putting your head against the wall, and then hoping that it works, because right now, time is of the essence, and I think that's important that most people don't realize, is that you probably could win this, but can you win it in 4 minutes, or can you win it in 1? Ideally, you want to shave down that time and win it in 1, and then we start seeing really strange plays like the Strange going for the backline. I think the Strange is realizing, like, hey, nobody's going for the backline, so I'm going to do it myself, but because that happens, then we're seeing the front line no longer really work anymore. You know, they don't really have that front line, and then they get pushed back, and guess what happens? They stagger. They're going in one at a time. The eliminations are happening over here, so let's go and fly in. Let's go and pause right here so you can see that perspective. This is what I mean when I talk about a stagger, running in one at a time, and it just keeps happening like that over and over, where you're getting eliminated, and because this team is more clumped up and working together as a group, it's working way better for them, and they keep pushing it back until you pretty much get it spawn. Now, I would say at this point, this is where some of the mistake happens, especially for them, is that they're pushing way too hard, too much, and pushing them back, where they have to pretty much give them space to the point where if they start staggering and they have a long run back, then that can be a problem as well. Let's see what this team does. They're putting so much pressure on them, and they're really winning this fight across the board. You'll notice that, okay, again, with the DPS, you'll notice the Star-Lord is really pushing forward. They're not using their height, their elevation. If you're a Star-Lord, if you're a Human Torch, you're a Storm, you really got to use that height, because being at melee range is a really strange thing to do unless you're pretty much shooting at spawn. That's another thing. I noticed that the tanks are switching it up, trying to figure out a way to make this work. But because the DPS are also acting as tanks, the healers, you'll notice, are having a hard time struggling to who to keep up. Do they keep up this front line? Do they keep up this front line? And the lack of cohesion there is completely overwhelming, where it's much easier for this enemy team to make that play. And to my friend's credit, he is in the back trying to find that isolated moment as Bucky there. There we go. There's the height. That's where it starts working. And they start getting that pressure. And there's that knock. And now, because they have this opening, this is where you say they need to push. I think it's really funny that we got the ding in that moment from my phone. So if you're checking your phone, no, that wasn't you. But I think I'm going to leave it in because that's perfect. Ding, this is the exact moment that you need to push. Now, if you're going to push, the problem that we have, and I'm going to nitpick here, is that, like I said, I think this team could have won, but you need more time on the clock. Look how much time is remaining and how much that's a problem. And I'm not going to watch the remaining of this round because you can already tell the biggest problem, the synergy, because I think we've already nailed it, and I don't want to overdo it and over-explain concepts. We're going to go to the next round and discuss what the problem was there with a whole different team, a whole different setup that wasn't necessarily dive, because you're probably asking, well, if they don't have dive, what's the problem? That's what we're going to discuss in the round 2. Again, very long video. But what's fascinating here is when we look at this is, remember, can your team do it in 6 minutes or can they do it in 2? Sure, you can win in 6 minutes, but you need to make sure that the time is respected. So because the time is not respected here by this team, and yeah, they finally were able to make a push and make a play, how far can they realistically get through before it's too late? So they finally make a play, they're pushing forward, and guess what that wall is going to look like if they're not synced up or it's really working? What can you do? Because now the enemy team is staggering, and this is actually great, the fact they're able to kind of get picks and stagger them across. But now that they're here, let's see how they keep the momentum. And also where, like I had mentioned, Star-Lord is really low to the ground, okay? That's just a fact there. Star-Lord definitely needs to be up in the air. If you're a flyer, know your role, ladies and gentlemen. Know your role and what you're meant to do. Everyone's getting eliminated. I asked the question, where are the tanks at this moment, you know? Thor's in the back line. The strat has changed. And because the DPS don't really realize this a bit, It just feels like the front line that was once held by Strange and Magneto is just getting obliterated at this point. Because remember, the DPS already had a hard time overextending, and now because they have tanks that are overextending, they just cause for easy picks, and now the time is out, and that's it. It's over. And I promise you that momentum that you have in the first round of all those problems carry over in terms of attack and defense. And it's really important to say, okay, when you do this again, what is it going to look like? And can you change things up a little bit? If you don't change it up, guess what happens? If we look into the next round and we see the same tactics being run through and nobody changes and tries to feel things out, look at the defending team. What do you think is going to happen at the end of the day? They're able to push through relatively quickly because they're more efficient and disrupt the back line just because you know they had push. And even this team, notice how they started to switch. Even you'll notice that they switched from their initial standpoint here, from what they were doing before, making a change, and then even making it more difficult for them to win. They finally did change at the very end. You'll notice the Star-Lord finally switched up healers, but a little too late. You got to do it pretty early on if you know it can't work. Even if you're great at that character, stuff can happen. Trust me, I've made those mistakes early on. Don't do it. Switch as fast as you can. Have fallbacks if you notice your plan is not working. Let's go into the next round. Now, before we go on to the next round, let's do some post-analysis on the stats. Remember, stats aren't everything. My friend here managed to do a ton of damage, but that's not the whole story. I think the biggest tip I can step away is that even though you might be SVP or MVP, there's always still more that you can do. Now, this isn't just always put the blame on yourself, but to always hold yourself accountable and say, how can I get better? There's always a reason why you are stuck in a certain elo, and maybe perhaps there's a reason why you're always seeing a defeat screen. Now, there is a caveat here. It could be because you just don't have enough time to play. That's understandable as well, but there is always an answer at the end of the day. Now, something to keep in mind as well is that while you're looking at the stats, they always don't paint the same picture. Sometimes your team could actually heal less, but that could be because your DPS were getting a lot more eliminations. But we do see here the correlation to the damage being cut off because the healers were also on point. Now, we could pick on that poor little Star-Lord, but at the same time, perhaps the focus fire could have been better by the two of them. Maybe, again, this is a team-based game at the end of the day, and when you're looking at stats, it doesn't read the whole picture. Just because you did the most damage or felt like you were winning doesn't mean you can't try to play as a team and win together. It's like trying to bring in a star player with some of the worst players. If there's that friction, then you're never going to win. So the best advice I can provide is always focus on what you can do as a team. Yes, there's always going to be frustrations where you're like, I don't like this player, I didn't like this player, I didn't vibe with them, I was frustrated, I was angry, and so forth. But at the end of the day, you really have to understand what could you have done as a team to improve, and where could you put your ultimates better timed. Just like we mentioned with Bucky, yes, he did the most damage, but perhaps one of the ultimates could have been pretty game-changing. Don't want to put all the weight on your shoulders, bring you down to the point where it's like, it's all my fault, but use it as leverage, as a positive, say, what could have I done to help my team win? Now for the next gameplay, I'm deciding to do the opposite. Let's take a look at the stats here. Right off the rip, we know that the Magic is who we're going to look at, did a phenomenal job with 39 kills and really hit the back line really strong. We also see the SVP was pretty much unattended to, and at one point they were arguing in the chat because I was watching my friend just to get some insight on how this round went, frustrated that they couldn't knock out the Human Torch in this scenario. Now, keep in mind that Bucky could be a switch to Hela or something to deal with more of the flyer characters, right? Bucky's going to definitely struggle at a distance with that. And also having that switch is very, very important. But at the end of the day, they did win. It's crazy because they were at such a massive advantage, but they're still bickering within themselves. Remember, when you're typing, you're wasting precious time, and every second matters. Remember when we looked at the timer and we only saw 1 minute, how much that time matters, and even 10 seconds, 30 seconds can make a break whether or not you win the game or you lose the game. So what we're going to do, let's go ahead and break this down even further. Let's go right into the round and discuss. This was clearly not a dive team in which way besides what we see from the Magic, but let's see how people tend to play with it, but also could have easily switched to Namor. Tim definitely made the change there. So let's get into the round, shall we? So we saw right there that it was the silver lobby. We do see everyone's pretty much locked in with their characters. We're going to look at the first round specifically because once the second round gets going, they pretty much hard hold them because they did a fantastic job in general, just attacking across the board. The Magic is definitely going to be our star player here that we're going to spectate. I guess the best way to look at it is that at lower elo, dive is what creates those openings. But when you looked at some of my other spectating, it wasn't the dive, it was definitely the Bucky or somebody making a pull to make a player find that pick that found that opening. And that's what a Visible Woman can be also great at as well. So let's take a look at the other POV. We're going to take a look at what the Magic does to disrupt that back line. And keep in mind, this could be done with the Venom, this could be done with tanks, this could be done with flanking. This could be done a different way. The goal here of what you're trying to find is that initial pick, and when you find that pick, what it can do for your team and create an opening, so then you can pretty much 5v6 or 4v6 and so forth. So let's go to advance just a little further here. So right off the rip, let's go ahead and pause and just take a look at the difference from the other team and how they're positioning. There's some major red flags here that I want to look at. I think one of them that is really strange from this team right off the rip is having the Hela be the flank right here. The Hela is very much split from the team, while this team is, well, you know, the attacking team is playing very much together and making their play. They don't have a flank. Their Flyer's pretty much playing the rank of Hela. These roles probably should have been swapped, because at least he could fly away and get to a different angle. Maybe Thor could have pushed a little more aggressively. They are running only one tank actually looking at this, which is not the best. And here another one to point out is that Penny is not necessarily the best either at playing offensive. Now, it doesn't mean that it cannot be done, because it clearly worked here when they were securing space, and then the Penny was able to hold that position, but I definitely found it pretty strange. Now, again, just because we say something may or may not work, there is a team in world in which it can, because Penny could essentially go right over to the point, secure it with a Doctor Strange, and that could be a pretty massive play to hold if the Magic creates an opening to secure that space and really push them out from the door here and from the angle over here. So let's go to watch how this plays out. Let's watch the Hela POV, just because I thought it was very strange of where they were positioned right off the rip, because they're not holding any damage here. They're in the back looking for an angle, right? Which almost gets a pick. There, actually they do get a pick. Now, one would say here as well, and this is where people get frustrated and angry, says, I created an opening, how come nobody's capitalizing on it? Well, it's up to the Hela to reposition back with a squad or keep pushing in, but also communicate that the pick did happen and what the play is afterwards. I think that some of the biggest problems that we see is that what is the follow-up after something happens? If you've ever played a battle royale, the question always comes, well, what are you going to do? You got a knock, are you going to play off of it? And Penny actually works here, because then the Hela almost gets eliminated from that angle, but the Magic is doing a great job putting pressure, and the Hela's taking off angle with the Johnny Storm, and then the front line is definitely having a bit of struggle here. So this is an example of where it works, but also the awareness consistently with Penny is, or from the avoiding the Penny mines, is also another major tip. You know there's a Penny in offense, what do you need to be aware of? But here, this is where they let the Penny pretty much run wild with this, right? Hela may have gotten picks, but didn't secure the pressure forward along with everyone else. Everyone on the front line pretty much was getting picked off one after another, because the team here was playing so cohesively together, and their Magic was able to find an opening and just secure space. Having the worst case scenario with the Penny there was the red flag, is saying if Penny can get onto the point and then also pretty much gate and block off the Hela or whoever's flanking, and then their focus fire, and this is the downside of having nothing but flanking or people who are going off angle to other locations, other lanes, is that you start to question, well, of course then when we look here, the focus is going to be, and I love this aerial view, I wanted to do it for this, is where they start to disrupt them pretty much and secure their space, because they're moving as one big unit. So let's go and back up and take a look at how that looks, because I find it's just fascinating to look at in real time here. We're going to sit here. Let's take a look. So remember, Hela is in the back, but notice how all they have to focus on is here, and then they're able to isolate out the tanks. And pretty much it's like watching an amoeba essentially gobble things up. The amoeba is moving forward and consuming them, while the back line here is unable to put enough pressure because they're moving cohesively as a unit. And like we said, moving all the way back in disrupts that flow, right? Even though the Bucky's not getting a whole lot of eliminations and their magic is doing a whole lot of work, at least the Bucky is still within the group so then they can pick up the weight together and work as a unit. Because even though these picks are happening, the team over here is unable to move, because the problem that we have here, let's go ahead and pause it right here. The problem that we have is that they would need to move cohesively as a unit to push, and then they would need to converge all at once. The problem is that they are so split, even though they're doing a great job of getting picks, but they're not moving cohesively to become that amoeba unit to take out red team, right? That's what we're seeing. Red team is playing so cohesively together that it's hard to disrupt. And even with all the penny mines and trying to secure that space, it becomes a real problem for them to actually push forward, which is why the tactics need to change immediately when you notice this isn't working. Having Hela back at the front line, or even a switch at that point, would be massive to make sure Penny doesn't get on the point, or making sure that they handle the magic, because they realize that magic is the bigger threat. They might be taking out the Bucky, but they realize, okay, when we look at this, what is the bigger disruption? Magic. So if you realize, let's take care of the magic, and the Bucky becomes a problem, then you start to handle the Bucky at that point. You need to pivot. You just can't keep taking out the same thing expecting a different result, because something else may arise and become a problem. This game is all about switching and changing your tactics. You'll notice that handles more on the tanks and the DPS, sometimes less on the healers specifically. As long as the healers are doing a great job timing their ultimates and securing the group, there's not much of a problem there. But also healers can have great synergy when it comes to like Bucky and Punisher with Rocket, for example, or let's say Invisible Woman, let's say with Human Torch, The Thing, or Mr. Fantastic. What is your goal, and what are you trying to counter together, and what do you need to switch to help your team better survive? So what we're going to do now is let's take a look at how they play cohesively. And now the biggest problem that we see here is that everyone is running in one at a time. Well, let's take a look at the Thor's POV here. Everyone is running in one at a time and getting eliminated. And because of that, they're creating that stagger effect, right? This is a great example of where one goes back and then they push in, this one gets eliminated, then this pushes in and then gets eliminated, and then they're in the back line, they get eliminated. It's just a constant everyone resetting one at a time, going in, and being late, while the other group is staying cohesively together. Even though they're getting one pick, there's still a group that you have to deal with, and they're on top of each other. It causes a lot of delays, and because there's lack of cohesion. So that awareness that you have to have and say, okay, flanking isn't working, this isn't working, what can we do to change up our tactics to fix this and improve? That's the biggest question that you need to have. So let's take a look at the poor Thor going in by themselves, gets eliminated, right? We knew that was going to happen. Gets revived right here. And while they're making a push here, this is exactly what they need. Let's take a look. The push is happening by Thor, which is respectable. But where is everyone else? Everyone else is kind of the back end, which is what Hela would do. Punisher, but also he's just by himself, so therefore he's going to get focus fired. So the healers, either Thor needs to back up just to be a little bit closer here, or they need to switch their tactics up a little bit in terms of characters, or be closer up. So then it's not just all in one person, because right now they're one tanking. And unfortunately, Thor, while is a great, disruption, taking all that damage by himself is just way too much. Because once they start getting LOS and they're able to pick off the Thor by themselves, take a look where this starts to fall apart. Because when magic comes in, you're going to see magic go for the flank here. Ready? You see them over on the left. And the magic starts to do work back here. And there it is. This is over for the back line. And now Thor is overextended, and nobody is watching this back line. The Hela's not here. The Human Torch is trying to help with the back line as best as possible. But now this is where the staggering effect comes in, and the magic it's just free to do whatever she wants, essentially. The Thor realizes that it was a problem and says, oh wait, I need to come back. And then that pressure that they once created is literally gone. It's now gone. And that awareness, because one could argue, Thor could be like, what is my team doing? Like, why are you guys playing so poorly? I don't understand. Why can't we play cohesively together? Well, at the end of the day, when we start to realize it, that awareness, when you realize the magic is going for the back line and what the biggest threat is here, that's what you need to change, because magic is now going to go back in. Let's take a look for them. The magic is really making the biggest plays, realizing that, could you imagine if this was a different character? That, yes, if she was right on top with a Thor, maybe they could have taken him out and what that could have done. But finding this opening here is really key. And make and break right here. Just making some massive disruptions. And then being cohesive with the Doctor Strange. Yeah, they lost some teammates, but look at this. The outplaying and just absolute destruction of the team not realizing who the biggest threat is. I promise you, if this team hard focused this magic and got her out, what that could have done. But each person on the enemy team is so hard focused on what they want to do as an individual that they forget to play as a team. Because now, okay, they got rid of the magic and they've stabilized, and what's going to happen again? This is my biggest tip for anybody hard stuck silver and any of those rounds, or bronze, silver, and gold, is that, okay, you've stabilized. What was the issue and what did you eliminate that caused it? Because look at magic over there on the angle coming in and what the problem is. Now, again, just a little reminder is that Bucky is being hard countered by pretty much the Human Torch. But like we had mentioned, it's pretty clear that the magic is the one that needs to be addressed. And so it's just the recurring theme is always to assess what is the bigger threat and what is the bigger problem. And if you realize, even though you see the Scarlet Witch going for a flank, but not dealing with the magic, it doesn't make a whole lot of sense. And sometimes, I will be very honest with you guys, these are moments that are harder to see because you might tunnel vision. You may not see the bigger picture. Essentially, no pun intended, but what you have to do is take the lens out, look at these VODs, and because they're all available to everybody, just as we were looking, and then ask those questions and say, what should I have been focused on and what actually was the problem? And sometimes when you realize the problem and you tell your teammates, they may not be able to understand it either. And that's where I know people get frustrated because they say, oh, well, I knew what the problem was and I was trying to deal with it. But of course, that isn't always going to be clear for your teammates, and that's why they are in bronze, silver, and so forth, right? And that happens even in upper tiers as well. Is that tunnel vision, and sometimes you'd have to realize and say, you know what, there's not much I could have done here, but at least I'm aware of what did happen and pretty much what I need to counter it. So I know this video is already really long. If you enjoyed just this concept, I'd love to keep doing it more. I kind of wanted to try to keep it within a realm of being realistic, but then also trying to cover as many tips. At some point, I guess I'll leave you with this horrible analogy, because I'm always infamous for horrible analogies, is that somebody always has to take lead, no matter who it is. And so I'm going to give an example. Let's say you're with a group of your friends, right? And everyone is indecisive. Somebody is always going to be the one at the end of the day to say, let's go to a restaurant or not, or let's just stay and do nothing. And even if the whole team as a whole decides to do nothing and they never regress, well, that is also a decision. So unfortunately, try to be the team or step up and make a firm decision whether you feel it's right or wrong, because you can always come back here in the replays at the end of the day and look to say, let me go look and investigate and look for big defining moments of the dive pushing forward, or an ultimate that was misplaced, or when we were completely separate, or whenever we didn't push because we did specific damage. Big defining moments make a really big impact to your gameplay, and sometimes it could be identified with just a few key moments of setting up, just like we saw the thing at the very start of the video. If you enjoyed this video, please don't forget to leave a like, comment, and subscribe. I appreciate all of your patience. If you got to the end of the video, I'd love for you to comment and say you got to the end. I know some people comment, wow, you rambles quite a bit, but at the end of the day, I'm hoping to help somebody, because I saw the comments before that it really did help others. And so that's my goal here. So thank you again. See you guys all in the next one.